So I want to show you something to do with um, how you can efficiently make your assets. Maybe you're not going to be the ones making your assets for your environments. That's why I'm recording it so that you can pass it on to other people and so you at least have an understanding. So this is a set of modular assets here. I started off literally just with this thing here, this little guy, and it's just a version of a front of a wall. And then I added a little border on the side and a border on the top. And actually we have another top border somewhere. Yeah, there, the border at the top here. And I made a few versions of it. I made a blank version where it's just a blank wall, made one with a bigger window, made one with a little grater, a little like grating like this as if it's a garage. And I also made a little inner wall for the ones that have a thing. Now there's something that's the same across almost all of these assets, and that is that their pivot point is in the corner so that they can all be referenced to each other. This isn't essential for everything, but it's definitely necessary for these wall pieces, and here's why. So here's an Unreal scene, all right? So in this Unreal scene, I'm just gonna quickly check if I'm using the right display capture. I am using the right display capture, cool. So here's an Unreal scene, right? And I remembered you guys telling me that you're gonna have, like one of your groups was saying that your game is gonna have one wall that's just buildings, right? So out of those, there are about 12 assets, but four of them are just two types of doors and two types of handles, so not really a big deal. Out of just those assets, we can make this entire like kind of block area. So obviously these are other assets and stuff like that, and we set up the lighting. And we're going to talk about that in a sec as well. But let's just look at these. So initially, when you import these assets that are just, let's go where they test, light mapping, there we go. So when you import them, because I've got the pivot point in that little corner, I can grab one of these and I can just throw it in. Let's go into just unlit. Or actually, let's just go detail lighting. Actually, let's just increase our visibility a little bit. Beautiful. Right, so we have this little guy here. We have this little wall piece. And because we have the thing on the corner, if we want to make them all connected, we can just copy it over. And when we bring it close, we can hold V and we can just snap it onto the other side. And it's perfectly snapped onto it. And you're not going to get any Z fighting, you're not going to get any seams, it fits pretty well. Now you might not want them to be connected, maybe you just want to make sure that your border is in the correct space. And to put that border in the correct space again, you can just put that roughly nearby, hold V and snap it into place. And then you can less carefully start copying everything over. We've made the same thing for the top border, so that it doesn't look like they're just empty. We can throw that in here. That's the little top border. And again, because the pivot points, they're modeled in a way that they would fit together. So I can just snap that in there. And I can even continue on and move things upwards and do stuff like that. So you can essentially really continue on working with these and making a whole set of things. You don't even need to drag in new ones because you can just select the one, let's say this one. And because on Blender, they're all made inside the same space as each other, in Unreal, I can just select it, go down here to where the static mesh area is, and just drag in another version of it, and it's going to immediately replace it. And because the pivot point is in the same spot, the scale is in the same spot, they're exported the same way, I can just swap these out to different types and start getting variety. So out of just a few assets, you can essentially make a whole building, a whole block. And this is the basis of modular modeling, right? I'm going to delete these two signs just so they're not distracting for the moment. And that's the basis of modular level making rather than modeling. Modularity just means things like components that fit together, right? So you can model stuff modularly to make it faster for modeling, or you can model pieces which then you put together in a scene. So what I would have hated to see is that you guys make this whole thing as one asset in Blender, which you then have to UV and texture and all that stuff. Instead, you make a few little assets and you mix them together. One more thing to show you about this, something I showed you last week. Now, I don't know how your Unreal is set up. Maybe you're using, do you guys ever have to bake your lighting when you're working in your Unreal project? Is that something you guys do? Right, so you guys are using baked lighting because this example project isn't, which was annoying because I couldn't show you the thing I wanted to show you. But for baked lighting, Unreal creates something called a light map. You can make those yourselves. There's a way to make it. I went through the process of making it to show you guys, but then I realized the new version of Unreal makes such a good job of it that you essentially except in special circumstances, you don't need to do that. Now, in Blender, because you can re-import your assets anytime and they'll be in the exact same position, I didn't worry about the UVs too much beyond making sure that everything does have them. And when you're making hard surface assets like this, it's so easy to UV because literally you just need to select your asset, go into edit mode, do select sharp edges. And it's going to select all the sharp edges, and then you just go space, mark seam. And that's going to mark all the sharp edges as a seam. That's a rule generally for Blender that you want to have your, hold on, I'm forgetting which navigation controls I'm meant to be using. Was it middle mouse button on this one? No, it was Alt Shift. Oh my God, which was it? Was it the middle?
Shit.
It's middle mouse button with Shift Alt Control. Okay, got it. Because Maya and Unreal use the other one, so I get confused. Anyway, the main rule is that any sharp edge that you've not softened should have a UV seam. It doesn't always have to be the way. For example, for this one, I've made it so that the UV seam is in the middle because I don't care and I want the brick texture to go over that part. But generally speaking, you can make really easy UVs that way. I've done it for all of them, so I'll turn them all on. What I have in here is a few door handles, door versions, and stuff like that. Door handles are down here at the bottom because they don't need to be put perfectly in a correct position or whatever. And if I go edit and select all the faces, you see that they're all laid out. So I literally did the exact same process, making sure all the hard edges are cut. And then I just selected everything and went UV, unfold, and it's got everything in one space. If you select them individually, they still are separate pieces. Now, what's the reason we're doing this? We're doing this because when you import an asset into Unreal, it generates a second UV map. So if we show our UVs, let's take a look at UV channel 0. This is the UVs that I have made for this one. And a UV map is essentially another UV channel where the UVs for your asset are cut pretty much the same way, but they're laid out and spread out with spacing in between them. And what this is where lighting will be baked. So baking lighting literally means simulate where shadows should appear in our level and put those shadows in our level. And the resolution of those shadows and how they appear is defined by the second UV map, the light map. It's essentially like another texture map just for lighting, right? Now, one issue you run into when you start putting in all your assets, all of them have a light map. Even this little guy, this guy has a light map. Now, by default, every single one will be the same resolution. And if you go into your, let's go, instead of detail lighting, we want optimization, light map density. This is something you want to check out. I fixed all of mine so they look green. Anything that's green is a good resolution for your lighting. Anything that's blue is way too small, and anything that's red is way too big. So by default, this little handlebar, right? If you scroll down, or in here, you can just type in light map, right? So the light map resolution, not the minimum, all this stuff here, general settings, light map resolution, I set it to 16. By default, it was 512. Everything was around 512 by default. And if you look at it now, it's completely red. Some of these bigger pieces, let's open up their asset. These ones were at, it's at 64 now. These ones were like, not even 512. I think they were like 128 or something like that, right? So you can see that they change color as well. They get a little bit redder. And what you want to do is just make sure everything has the same color. And that means that based on the size of your object, your light map makes sense. Your light map, all the shadows will have the same resolution, even if they go across this guy. Because if this guy has 512, the shadows are going to be so freaking crisp on this. And if this is blue, the shadows are going to be really blurry on this. So you want to make sure everything's green. All the shadows are what they're supposed to be. So let me just open that up and put it back to 16. And this one, I don't remember, what was it, 64? There we go. Now they're all green, they're all working well. That's the other thing you should keep in mind in terms of setting up your things. Now, after you've done this, the rest is really simple. You can UV it later. You can texture it later. You can do everything later. So what you would do after you've gotten a modular base in here, constructed a level using it, got your light maps in, you would actually do your lighting next. Before you do your texturing, before you do anything else to your environment assets, you would set up the lighting of the level. Because essentially your lighting can be done now whilst everything is gray and it will look the same later on. So I'm going to go through talking to you a little bit about the lighting. I just want to show you one last thing though. Here I made it so that this asset has two material IDs. I've shown you this before. If I just select, get rid of all of this except this one. If I go into my layout, I've just given it two different textures here so that when I go into Unreal, there's two different material sets and I can then go in here and make a transparent material and place it onto the window. So now I have a transparent window material. Just something you can keep in mind that you can do for your blockouts as well. They don't all have to be the same material. All right, so let's talk a little bit about lighting. Now, what are the main components we have in here, right? And what's the setup we need? So the first thing that we have in here is obviously our directional light. And our directional light, depending on whether you want it to be daytime or nighttime, you change the color a little bit. So I'm going to set this to nighttime, so I've made the color cooler, slightly blue. If it's daytime, you set it slightly yellower. If it's nighttime, you probably don't want to have shadows as well. So this is what it looks like with shadows. I don't need those, so I'm going to turn them off. There's something else you need to change. You need to change how bright it is, right? You want to figure out how bright you want your scene to be. But there's something you have to turn off first. You have to turn it off two times. One is for your editor, the other one's when you actually play the game. You got to go in here into show, and you got to go to post-processing, and you want to turn off eye adaptation. And the reason you want to do this is because Unreal has this option for eye adaptation, which essentially always makes it brighter. So if I turn this on, my eyes, or the eyes of your character, no matter what brightness you set or how dark you make it, will try to adapt visually so it's almost as if it's as bright. If I go here and turn this off, this is the actual lighting. So eye adaptation literally does not work very well if you want a very specific lighting for your scene. It just makes it so you can't screw up the lighting and break your game. But if you know what you're doing, you actually want to turn off eye adaptation. You need to turn it off separately for your actual gameplay, I believe. But I can't remember at the moment whether it was turned off or not. It's in your post-processing volume. Which makes me move on to the next thing. So we have our directional light, whoop-de-doo. We need to change the lighting, turn off eye adaptation, who beans. What else do we have in this scene? We have two things in here. I'll increase it again because I actually can't see what's going on. We have two things in here, all right? We have this, which, not that. This thing here, where is it? Here we go. We have this thing here called the light mass importance volume, right? This, especially if you're baking your lighting, you need it because it's essentially where lighting settings work. Look into the exact definition of everything that it does, but it's something that you need to have across your entire scene, right? Something that needs to be in there. Aside from that volume that needs to encompass your scene, there's a post-processing volume. And the post-processing volume is essentially editing. You can edit the look of your scene. You guys are using it already, I know some of you, because you've told me like what you do with it. Now, if I turn this off, you can see it does change a lot. If you open up the post-processing volume, in here you have a bunch of stuff. So if we just go to all, you can scroll down to something like, why is everything opened? That's annoying. You can scroll down to something like color grading, and you can look at the global color grading, and you can change, the saturation, you can change the contrast, which I've done. You can change all of these values to essentially adjust your scene. Because I want it to be nighttime, but I want it to be visible, I've actually like made it a lot more bright looking. So let me reduce this again to like what I wanted it to be, which is about like very dim lighting. And the color grading allows it to also look a little bit brighter. Maybe not that light, maybe something like this. And the color grading, the post-process volume allows me to work on that. I actually recommend turning off post-processing until you finished your initial setting up of your lights, because afterwards you want to edit the actual lighting. You don't want to be lighting your edit. You might go back and forth a little bit afterwards, but initially try to do it without it, right? Now, that brings us to the next part, which is the actual lights within the scene. So there's three kinds of lights that are mainly important, and they have different uses. One is a point light, very, very generic, very simple. It has a radius. You don't want that radius to go beyond the area that you're lighting. If you guys have light maps and not everything is active real time, like ray tracing, like this scene seems to be, there are different kinds of lights. Even here, we have a static light, which means it has to be baked, a stationary light, which can be baked and also has dynamic stuff. Then you have a movable light, which is 100% dynamic. And in the game, you can move it around and it will live affect the, what do you call it? The positioning of lights and shadows and stuff like that. But that's just a little bit more expensive, obviously, as well for performance. Very basic, not much more we need to say in there. The only thing I'd say is if it's an interior scene and you're using actual light bulbs, or you want to put light where an actual light bulb would be, you can actually use temperature and change the color temperature of it just like you would with a real light bulb. So you might actually make a room more warm than bright, stuff like that. Why is this blue? I don't remember why this is blue. Is this blue? No, why is this blue? I can't remember. I'll check later. Oh, it's because there's a window. Yeah, there's a window. The window is blue. Okay, another type, spotlight, useful for kind of just lighting larger areas. So obviously, if you're nighttime, having some kind of large light source will give you an opportunity to create actual shadows in there as well. And it's just a good way to light large areas of your scene. So if we turn our scene to the initial kind of level of darkness that we wanted, these few spotlights that I have over here, this one, and this one. If I turn those off, it's a darker area. Playing with your character here won't be interesting. Lighting it up just signals to the player that this is a playable area. So, and also they're useful if you have big, hangars, or you want to light a larger area, but in a direction, not necessarily everything above it and around it. One more light, and this is the most interesting one because it's newer, it's in Unreal 5, and people used to have to simulate making this, which is what do you call it? A rectangular light. And this is all it does. It's just a light that's rectangular, pushes in one direction. You could use this for a bunch of stuff. You could put it in front of like escape, like signs like this. You can use it to emphasize light that's glowing out of somewhere. So for example, if I turn this one off, this whole area that I want it to look like, ooh, the lights from inside the building are sticking out, I can make that look that way without literally lighting everything behind it as well, which is what, if I put this little light here outside, that's what it's gonna do, which is not what we want. So you can use it to simulate stuff. And you also use it for interiors. So what they used to have to do is when you're inside a building and there's windows and you don't want the light to be coming from this light up here because it's weird and it leaves everything dark. You don't want to use eye adaptation because it's weird and it doesn't let you control the lighting. Using interior lighting and stuff like that, you can actually use rectangular lights in the positioning of windows. So for example, if we come in here, this is what I did here. This is an interior. If it's daytime, I'd want light to be coming through here. Instead of relying on getting this slightly functionally working, I can just create as if sunlight is coming through the window, control it manually how much of the sunlight, is visible and stuff like that, have shadows come through and things like that. So this is used for interiors as well. It allows you to change the width of it, so you can make it actually the exact width of the window as well. They used to have to do this by using a geometrical plane and applying emissive to it and making the emissive or actually not even applying a mist, they would reflect the light off it or something. They do something really weird. They did it on the first version of the Dying Light game. I knew a guy who worked on that. Um, so that's what these can be used for. Really useful for interiors and stuff like that. And that's it. You just use these lights in your scene. You build everything up, and after that, you can apply your um, post-processing volume and make it look more snazzy and whatever you want to do. Um, and that's the main thing for getting started with really like putting together an environment that will be able to be continued to finishing, right? In an efficient way. You start off with your modular assets, you build them up, you make the space, don't worry about texturing yet. Start lighting your scene, put in your volumes in there, and then you just continue on through and make these things. One more thing though, just before we go, reflection capture actors. I remember that I talked with some of you about these, and you guys said you were using them just to make sure that you guys are using them well. Essentially, what this is a 360 camera that captures information of the space around it up to that radius. And then that information is used when calculating light reflections and actual reflections like mirror reflections or reflectivity, right? And the rule for these goes roughly as such. There's a kind of a rule set for how to use it. This is our space, right? This is our gameplay space. So you have one huge one that covers everything. And then let's pretend that there's little walls here, right? Separating this into rooms or whatever, something like that. And then you have smaller ones for every kind of isolated section. And then you just have individual ones for every surface that you know will have reflections. So let's say you have a really shiny window that's going to have reflections, or a mirror, or even like, let's say you're playing a first person exploration game and you're going to look at a picture on a wall and it's going to have reflections of the glass in front of the picture. You would put a little one in front of those areas because essentially that will then reflect the thing that is reflected of an object in a scene will be whatever the closest reflection capture actor is. So if you're in this empty space and there's a reflection here, you're going to reflect some random stuff from over here, right? Whereas if you're in here and there's a reflection here, you're going to reflect directly what's in here. And this is what I've done for this scene. I put in one massive one over there, and then I put one in front of every single window. Now the thing is that the window also has transparency, so it doesn't do a great job of actually like showing reflection. I don't know if it will if I set it opaque. We can test it, but oh shoot, that was not what I wanted. This is what I wanted. There we go. Is it reflecting? Is it still transparent even? No, it is reflecting, but there's nothing for us to see in the scene that's being reflected anyway. But this is what the reflection capture actors are used for. It's not just for reflections as well, it is for overall kind of reflecting of light, not just mirroring stuff. I'll just set this back to translucent. If you want to make something that's actually shiny and has reflections, apart from setting the material to translucent, you just have to go down here somewhere and set it to the lighting mode to surface translucency volume. That's for if anyone wants to look that up again later on. All right, that's pretty much it. I can't remember if there was anything else in there. I think that is pretty much it. Modular assets, importing, building up your level, um, and lighting your scene. That's the main thing. So wherever you guys are at with your projects, when it comes to actually putting stuff together in Unreal, or if you have to make a lot of environments, if you have generated environments in a maze, or if you have a whole like bank you need to make, you can plan how to make the final look of it and the final assets for it using something like this, using modularity and literally. And if you don't have modular assets in there, but you already have a block out of the level of where the walls are going to be, where the play space is going to be, you can light that as well. You don't need to wait to have these modular pieces. You can light it regardless of whether you have Well, that's not my computer's fan. That's a different computer's fan. That's a very loud fan. All right, that was pretty much it. I stopped the recording.